All right, today we are going to learn about blood flow through the heart. And I want to remind you that it is okay for your drawings and things to look messy as long as you understand it. You can draw the heart like this. It might look like this. It might look like this. It might look like this, right? Kind of messy. Maybe it doesn't make sense to other people or might not be the prettiest picture, but if it makes sense to you, it works. So we're going to walk through this today. The flow of blood through the heart. Okay? So if you want to get out a scratch piece of paper, we're starting blank all over. First and foremost, there are 4 chambers of the heart. Now you can draw it something like this, right? It's not the cute little heart that we've always learned that looks something like that. It looks a lot more lopsided. There are 4 chambers in the heart. And before we even begin that, remember that if you have like a person here, let's draw this, someone like this. And here's their heart, right? When you're learning this, the right side is going to be over here and the left side is over here because it's in relationship if you're looking at someone from the front. So remember that. So this is going to be the right side, this is going to be the left side. There are 4 chambers in the heart. We'll draw them something like this. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Just quickly throw something down. What does this mean? The top 2 chambers are known as atria, and the bottom 2 are known as ventricles. Okay, so therefore, this is going to be the right atrium. This will be the right ventricle. This will be the left atrium. And then the left ventricle. Something to note about this, even just very basic, is that the left ventricle is the largest chamber. It holds the most volume of blood. And it also, which I have poorly drawn here, has the most surrounding myocardium, which is heart muscle around it. The reason why is because this is the very last chamber that oxygenated blood is in before it gets shot out to the rest of the body to be delivered to all of your organs and other tissues. So we're going to walk through this process and how blood moves through the heart, but just generally understand there are 4 chambers. Remember that this is the right, this is the left when we're naming and labeling the heart. Okay, so that's just very basic. Now let's get into the blood flow. Okay, all right, so first off, we'll draw our heart again, looking something like this. And it's okay to erase during this process too, because we're going to kind of build on what we know here. So we've got, right, there are 4 chambers. The first place that blood goes is here into the right atrium. How does it get there? We draw this long vein here. Oh, first, let's establish something. A equals away equals artery. An artery is a vessel that carries blood away from the heart. It doesn't always mean that it's oxygenated or deoxygenated. It can be either. So A is for away, which is the artery. So if blood is being taken away from the heart, then that's an artery. If it's being brought towards, that's a vein. Right? So this is towards. So it's the opposite. Okay, so first blood needs to go into this right atrium, and it's going to come from here, which is the superior vena cava or vena cava, and then there's also an inferior vena cava, what have you. There's also a third thing that we can't see because we're looking at the anterior view of the heart. The third vessel, the third vein, the third artery that we cannot see here is the coronary sinus. So we're going to put a star here. We can't see it. The coronary sinus, these 3 things, 1, 2, and 3, are 3 vessels that take deoxygenated blood and dump it here into this right atrium. Okay, so here's the right atrium. Now we're going to draw like a little dotted hole because that's where these things enter, is from the posterior part. So the superior vena cava is bringing deoxygenated blood from like the head and the neck. The inferior vena cava is bringing deoxygenated blood from the inferior parts of the body, like the limbs. And then the coronary sinus is deoxygenated blood from the heart itself. And all three of these dump all of the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. So let's go ahead and give this the color of blue. It's deoxygenated blood. Now what? The deoxygenated blood in the right atrium needs to go down here to the right ventricle. So it has this hallway, which is, it's a valve here, which we'll draw like this. This valve is the tricuspid valve. So we'll draw it down here. This is the tricuspid valve. It's also known as the right AV valve. And why is that? It's because it's the right side. It's the valve on the right side that connects the right atrium to the right ventricle. So the right atrioventricular valve. It makes sense. Just word dissect. It's also known as a tricuspid valve. So this deoxygenated blood from the right atrium is then going to travel down to the right ventricle, down here. It's still deoxygenated. The reason why is because it hasn't gone to the lungs yet, because that's where it will go to pick up oxygen. So it's deoxygenated here too. At this point, blood wants oxygen, right? So it needs to go to the lungs to go and pick up that oxygen. So how is it going to do that? There's going to be another valve. It's going to go up like this. And how many lungs do we have? We have 2 lungs. Remember, this is the right side, this is the left side. It has 2 lungs. So a branch is going to go to the left lung, and then a branch is going to go to the right lung, like this. And so this deoxygenated blood, there's another valve here. This is the pulmonary valve. And this is the pulmonary what? Is it going to be an artery or vein? Based off of this criteria. Well, it's taking blood away from the heart, so this is going to be the pulmonary artery. So let me turn that here. This is the pulmonary artery. It's still carrying deoxygenated blood because it's taking this deoxygenated blood to go to the lungs to get oxygenated, to pick up oxygen. And don't forget that this valve right here that separates the right ventricle to the lungs, to the pulmonary artery, this is the pulmonary valve. So this blood then goes, it goes to both the right and the left lung, but let's draw it this way. So deoxygenated blood comes into the lungs, so kind of just picture the lung like here, like this. Deoxygenated blood comes into the lung, and it's going to then pick up oxygen. Like this, right? And so then the blood becomes oxygenated at this point. So we'll give it a red color. At the same time, because this is in the lungs is where gas exchange occurs, it's also dropping off, and we're going to exhale carbon dioxide, CO2, right? So this is the exchange that happens here in the lungs. So now you have blood that's oxygenated. It needs to go back to the heart because then it can get sent and like forced and pushed and pumped to the rest of the body. So now you have this oxygenated blood. It's going to get back in and be dumped into this left atrium here. How is it going to do that? There are these vessels here that look like this, that stick out. This arrow kind of sucks. So I'll just erase it, right? It doesn't make sense anymore. We're moving on. So you have this vessel here, and remember this is the same on the other side, we just have more room over here to kind of draw it out. This is then going to dump into this left atrium. It's going to take this oxygenated blood, and what's the name of these right here? So it's coming from the lung, so it's going to be pulmonary. And is it going to be an artery or a vein? Artery is away from the heart, vein is towards the heart. So it's taking this oxygenated blood towards the heart, so this is going to be the pulmonary vein. So the pulmonary vein takes oxygenated blood from the lungs and dumps it in here to the left atrium. And remember that it's oxygenated here now. All right, so now oxygenated blood from the left atrium needs to go down here to the left ventricle. So let's draw how it's going to get there. There's going to be yet another valve, kind of this hallway there. So then this oxygenated blood is going to go down to the left ventricle, still oxygenated at this point. So this is the fourth and final chamber. And remember, it's a larger chamber than the other ones because now it needs to squeeze and push this blood through the rest of the body. How that's going to happen is we have this big, big, big valve and this big artery, because it's taking blood away from the body. It's a very popular word in like medicine, so most people know what this is. This is the aortic artery. Okay, so we'll just draw it like this. We'll give it its three little branches, which we don't need to know the names of right now. This is kind of what it looks like, right? A lot of medical shows talk about it, so people are generally familiar with this aortic artery because it's a big major artery and it is responsible for taking this oxygenated blood and shoving it to the rest of the body. There's going to be yet another valve here, which if this is the aortic artery, then we can probably deduce that this is going to be the aortic valve. Similar to pulmonary artery, has a pulmonary valve, right? So you can label that too. And then that's how oxygenated blood is going to get pushed and pumped to the rest of the body. So let's summarize this in a written form down at the bottom. We'll review this all again, but in a written form, so it's in a little bit of a different way. First, we want to start with, there's the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and we also know that the coronary sinus. All three of these together dump into where? The right atrium, which will be abbreviated RA, right? The right atrium. Then what happens? This deoxygenated blood in the right atrium goes to the right ventricle. So let's draw another arrow. It's going to the right ventricle. But a thing you should add into your notes is, what does it have to go through? What door does it have to go through in order to get there? That's going to be your tricuspid valve. So I'll just write tri there. So where does it go after the right ventricle? Here we are in the right ventricle. It's going to go to the lungs to pick up that oxygen. But what does it go through to get there? Right? It has to go through the pulmonary valve. And once it goes through the pulmonary valve, it then also travels through the pulmonary artery. After the lungs, so here we're coming in, we're deoxygenated blood, we're in the lungs, we've performed gas exchange. Now we're going to go back to the heart. Which chamber are we going to? Going to the left atrium. How are you getting from the lung to the left atrium? Through this here, the pulmonary vein. So let's add that here. The pulmonary vein. After the left atrium, you go where? To the left ventricle. How do you get from the left atrium to the left ventricle? Here is through the bicuspid valve. I guess I can add that here. Tricuspid, bicuspid. The bicuspid, we'll add this here, is also known as the mitral valve. So you'll hear it both ways. Also known as the mitral valve. Okay, so we're in the left ventricle. Now it needs to go to the body, right? That's the whole goal. That's the end game here, is to get oxygenated blood to the body. So this is kind of the goal here, the finish line. How is it getting from the left ventricle to the body? It goes through the aortic valve, which then takes it through the aortic artery. So that's a different way, a linear way, and a written way to look at this here. Now, this process has to start all over, right? So you have oxygenated blood. Let's go through and do that really quick. Let's add colors to this. What is oxygenated and what is deoxygenated? Coronary sinus, superior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava, that is going to be deoxygenated blood. What about the right atrium? Still deoxygenated. Blood has not traveled to the lungs yet to pick up oxygen. Tricuspid valve, deoxygenated. Right ventricle, still deoxygenated. The pulmonary valve and the pulmonary artery, still deoxygenated. But, boom, right here where blood goes to the lungs and it picks up oxygen, now things have oxygenated blood. So the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated. Left atrium has oxygenated. Bicuspid, same story. Left ventricle, same story. And then to the body is oxygenated as well. But once you get to this end goal, this here, you've given oxygenated blood to the body, and the organs and tissues are going to use up that oxygen, and now it becomes deoxygenated. So what happens is then it starts all over. The deoxygenated blood from the head and the neck will travel through the superior vena cava to jump back into the right atrium. And deoxygenated blood from things like your limbs and other organs inferior to the heart are then going to dump into the inferior vena cava. And it starts all over again. So this is a quick way to draw it out. I would recommend that you practice this with me, draw it with me and then draw it again on your own to make sure you've got it and that you can label all of these things. I also really recommend thinking of it in a linear way as well, not just a picture, but being able to draw it out and be able to talk through this process. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and let me know what you think.